Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's first breakout session. We're very excited to have you here. My name is Alyssa Walker. I work with the PTC education team. I'm joined by several guests from some of our Onshape customers today. Very excited to have them here, and I'll give them the chance to introduce themselves in just a moment. As I said, I've worked with the PTC education team for 10 years now, and I have to say, I've been here since the pre-Onshape days, and now making Onshape the central focus of what we do in the education space has definitely been one of the most exciting and significant aspects of my time here at PTC and in education. So I feel very fortunate to have this group with us today, and I'll give them the chance, as I said, to introduce themselves here in just a moment. I will be the leader of this session, or your host and moderator for this discussion. We also are joined by Bridget Lorenzen, my colleague from the PTC education team. She will be moderating questions in the Q&A box. So please make sure that if you have questions throughout the session to post those there. She'll keep an eye on those for us, and we will have dedicated time at the end of our session to answer as many of your questions as we can. And I encourage you to share your questions, all those burning questions you've got. As I said, we're very fortunate to have several Onshape ambassadors with us who all work for companies that use Onshape. So they're doing very cool things with Onshape in the real world every day, and we're really excited to have them here and to hear from them today. So what I would like to do to start out is give them the chance to introduce themselves. We'll start with Mark Yurden, who is a staff mechanical engineer with Google, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Alyssa, and thanks for having us here. My name is Mark Yurden. I'm a mechanical engineer at Google, and I work in the Google Maps division, specifically on designing and building a Street View car, which drives around and collects data from the environment and used to build the Street View, but as well builds Google Maps.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So glad to have you here and very excited to learn more about what you do and your experience and give you the chance to share that with everyone in our audience. Thanks. Next up, we have Sylvia Famania, who's joining us from Garrett Motion, and I'll let Sylvia tell us a little bit more about what you do and your role at Garrett.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sylvia Famania. I'm an aerospace engineer from Mexico. I work at Garrett Motion. Actually, yesterday was my first year anniversary. I'm a design engineer too. Thank you. I'm very excited. Time flew by, really. I work for a really great team. I design turbos for Caterpillar and John Deere. And yes.
That's fantastic. I know Caterpillar and John Deere have been longtime PTC customers as well. So it's exciting to hear that connection being made. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
And last but not least, of course, we have Suresh from Orbit Fab. Arul, why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. My name is Suresh. I'm a principal engineer at Orbit Fab. We build refueling technology so that you can refuel satellites on orbit and get more useful life out of them, which is really cool. Prior to that, I did a PhD at Stanford doing gecko-inspired adhesives, got to put a payload on the International Space Station, and all of that has been using Onshape.
Awesome. Thank you, Arul. And I'll just add, Arul has a cool story to share, and we'll hopefully give him the chance to share that later about, bringing Onshape into his workplace. I hope that, I know they were brief introductions, and again, we'll have more time to hear from them. And really that's the point of today's session, is to give these professionals the chance to share their insights and experience with all of you. I'm sure, those of you in our audience were able to gather just from these brief introductions that Mark and Sylvia and Arul represent a diverse experience and skill set, and certainly unique professional journeys. And the idea with today's session is to, share with you their insights, their experience, maybe places they stubbed their toes along the way that they can help you avoid stubbing your toes. But to give you some practical tips and recommendations based on their experience in the professional space. So I would say, for the prospective engineers in our audience today, hearing about all the cool things that you all do, I mean, developing the hardware that maps our planet and designing turbochargers and, gas stations in space. I love that tagline, by the way. Such cool things. And for our prospective engineers in the audience today, I think some of the big questions are, how can I do that? How can I position myself for the same kind of cool jobs? How do I prepare my portfolio to get the job that I want? And what are the skills an employer is looking for, today? What are the tools that I should know? I think these are all some of the questions that I would love for us to talk about and wrestle with a little bit throughout the course of today's session. And again, encourage all of you in our audience to please share your questions in the question box. So to kick things off, I'll start with a question for you, Mark. You've been working as a professional engineer for over a decade now, currently with Google, previously with NASA. Would love to hear from you, how have things evolved in industry from your perspective since you began your career, and how do you see them continuing to evolve? In the keynote earlier today from Jim Heppelman, he talked about this agile product development and how things are changing. Thought maybe you could talk about that just a little bit from your perspective. And then of course, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means then for students and what they should be thinking about as they prepare to enter that world. So Mark, your thoughts?
Certainly. Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I've certainly noticed over the years is the increased use of simulation and how simulation is getting more advanced and more accurate. This could be finite element analysis for structural simulation or sensor simulation. I work a lot with various sensors, cameras, LiDAR, and we're even looking at using simulation to predict the data from those. And I think advanced simulation is going to continue to grow and become used even more within industry. It allows you to test your system in the computer first, make changes, tweaks to it, and really learn about it before you're actually building hardware and putting it out in the world. Another area I've seen change over the years is advanced manufacturing, particularly around 3D printers. When I was a student, 3D printers were big giant things the size of refrigerators or even bigger than that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And now a lot of people have them sitting on their desk next to their computer. And that quick manufacturing of being able to design something, print it, or get it manufactured overnight in metal even and have it at your desk the next day, which is something that sometimes we do, really helps the iterative design process. And I think we'll see both of these to continue to increase in their prevalence in the industry. And another thing I think we'll see increase even more is advanced materials, composites being easier to work with and easier to use, and even polymers being easier and cheaper to work with.
Great. Yeah, interesting. It's funny you comment on the 3D printing, and I remember when it first came out, or when I was first aware of it, it did seem like this sort of magic thing, and how does it work? And and it was not terribly accessible for most people. And it's just interesting now. It's very common to walk into the average classroom and see at least one 3D printer there in many cases. That it's becoming more and more, I think democratized is a word we use often, as we see, Onshape, for example, is something that we're trying to allow the democratization of creation and creativity and design and development. And so it's interesting to think about these technologies that are evolving and becoming more and more accessible. Arul or Sylvia, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm glad Mark mentioned 3D printing, because that is certainly a core part of our process. Like when I was in school, like we had one 3D printer for the entire mechanical engineering department. And it was a nice printer, but it was one of those like Stratasys FDM printers, and the layer resolution isn't great, and it takes like overnight to print anything useful. And then now at work, we have 2 Formlabs printers, which like they hold 1 thou resolution, no problem. And you can just have those printing 24/7. And so anything that you can't do just in simulation, you can just print it and then test it for, you know, tens of dollars instead of thousands of dollars for aerospace quality hardware. We're actually also planning on using flight parts that are 3D printed in metal, which even like 5 years ago wasn't really a thing, except for very specific use cases, but now it's almost common practice.
Yeah, interesting. What would you say? I mean, again, and I'll probably say this several times throughout the course of our discussion today, you know, and bringing that back to our, you know, students, prospective engineers getting ready to enter the workforce. How should that change either what they're focusing on right now, or how they think about their preparation?
I think one thing I've somewhat noticed from, I also spent some time teaching after, you know, graduating at Stanford. One thing I've somewhat noticed is that students don't always think about how to make things as much anymore, because you can just throw it in a printer and it works. But most things, for at least our industrial applications, it still matters how you make it. And so that like design for manufacturability, don't let go of that just because everything can be 3D printed.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a great point. Sylvia, I wanted to give you the chance to comment if you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think that design for manufacturing is very important because, like Arul said, you say, oh, I'm going to build this part. And then somebody will say, okay, but how are you going to make it? And then you will say, oh, I don't know. Somebody will do it anyway. I remember having that issue at the very beginning of my career because I didn't have experience in that. But yeah, it's very, very important too. And I think students, it's very important that they prepare for that, and they will have an advantage, I think, in the industry.
So I'll open up to the group. You know, it's very important that they prepare for that. Any suggestions on specific things they can do to build that skill and being able to design for manufacturability?
They get your hands dirty. Play with things, build things in a machine shop, 3D printers, do hands-on work. It really makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I developed that skill as well, as just, you know, if your school has a machine shop, go live in the machine shop and then just build things. And like, yeah, there's rules of thumb for how long an end mill you can use, but until you get in there and you break one because you're trying to do something crazy, you don't really like feel it, right? So yeah, especially as a mechanical engineer, you just have to be touching hardware. There's really no way to develop that intuition just by doing coursework or reading books or other sort of book learning things.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I know Mark spent time working on a Baja team in college, if I'm correct, Mark.
That's correct.
I wasn't sure though. So Arul, Sylvia, did either of you work in some type of competitive team where you were getting your hands dirty and, you know, making and breaking things all the time? Just out of curiosity, kind of get a sense for this group here.
Some years ago at the university, me and my team competed in, let me see if I can remember the name, SAMPI, like Society of Advanced Material, something like that. And we needed to create a beam of composite material, but we needed to design it and then simulate it and then like make it. So I remember at the laboratory, it was a mess with all of the materials and everybody hands-on the beam. And it was really cool because I think that experience of going through the first idea on paper and then design it and then really doing it, it was a really cool experience. I really like that. And actually we got second place on that competition. It was really cool.
That's awesome. Arul.
Yeah, I did first robotics in high school. I actually started the team at my high school. And then undergrad and grad school, there wasn't really like, we didn't have a Baja team or a Formula SAE team or anything, but just like I said, go do fun projects in the machine shop. Like grad school, there's a tradition at Stanford where all of the mechanical engineering labs host a barbecue once a week. And so we just decided to make our lab logo like brand, so we could brand the buns on the CNC machine just because we had one. And like, that's not at all required to do, but it's just a fun thing that you're like, I could try to make this thing and learn how it works. And we learned a lot about how to machine stainless, and more specifically, how not to machine stainless. So
Yeah.
it's just get out there, and when you have an idea for a cool thing, try to do it.
I love that mindset. And, of course, I'm always going to want to promote Onshape, but I think one of the great things about it being available to students right now is that you have an idea, you want to make something, play around with it. It's there, it's available, and you can start to do that within the tool. And of course, it makes it easy to do some of that manufacturing. Absolutely. Piggybacking off of that, Mark, and I'll open this up to the group as well. You spent time working in a team, in a Baja team while you were in college. Can you talk a little bit about how that experience working in a team then compares to working in a team professionally now? How is it similar? What are some of the kind of takeaways that you had from that experience that you feel like you're still using in your job today?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. And for those that don't know, the Baja team, or Baja SAE, was a student design competition where we designed and built our own one-person race car and competed it against other universities from all over the world. And there's numerous project teams at colleges and universities similar to this. And the teamwork on the Baja team was paramount. It was probably the first real experience of having to work with a team. It was about 30 people. You had to encourage other folks to get work done. You weren't graded necessarily on this, so it was all volunteer, and people wanted to be there. They weren't forced to be there. So you learned a lot about how to encourage people to get the right work done, how to influence their designs, have design reviews among the team. And some of those skills I still apply today in my work, as far as even in the workplace, you still to some degree have to convince and lobby people for certain types of work to be done, convince them that your idea is worth doing and that they should work together to pursue that idea. There's some differences. I get more sleep now than I did working on the Baja team in college, so that's good. And in the real world environment, we have more resources available to us, whether that's money resources for our projects. In college, we were literally dumpster diving to find little scraps of metal that we can think, oh, this part I think will fit in this piece of metal we found in the scrap bin. Not as much of a problem now in the professional environment. And we have more personnel resources to draw on for knowledge and experience. When we don't know something, we can go find an expert in that area.
Great. I know in the keynote this morning, one of the great quotes that I kind of latched onto with that I thought was so interesting was Jim Heppelman referred to kind of the old way of doing things with file management and back and forth and people working in isolation and everything. That I believe the quote was something along the lines of, it's cholesterol in the arteries of innovation. And I would love to hear from this group again, what your process is like and what enables you to be innovative. I know Google is a different size company than Orbit Fab or than Garrett, for example. And so what do your processes look like, and how, again, bringing it back to the students in our audience and those who are, preparing, either have graduation on the horizon or thinking about, entering the workforce, what should they be thinking about? What are the skills that they should be honing to be able to participate in those processes?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mark.
that collaboration aspect definitely blends over into the tools you use, like Onshape or any other web-based collaboration tool. It really makes things so much easier, faster iteration on the design cycles from the old file-based days of CAD, and having different versions people are working towards. It was particularly a problem in college on the car team. You can imagine a bunch of students not paying attention to all those different things, but that's still a problem in industry, in the workplace, people working at different versions and not having the latest information. So collaborative tools is definitely something that students should get used to using.
In a collaborative way, right? Because a lot of times there's tools that are available that can be collaborative, but they're still used as if they're the old non-collaborative tools. And so thinking about how you use those tools, not just because they're collaborative, but use them in a collaborative way as well. I would add there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Arul or Sylvia, any thoughts on this topic in particular?
Yeah, I mean, we're a relatively small company, and we went from like 5 people to 30 people over the heart of the pandemic. And so we were really like gung-ho about, as a startup, we're also a relatively young company. So we're all like, we are full committed to cloud. So our requirements tracking software is in the cloud, our procedures software is in the cloud, our like inventory is in the cloud, like CAD obviously is in the cloud, all of our documents are in the cloud. So, I mean, we don't do this for security reasons, but in principle, I could go anywhere in the world with a Chromebook and have all of the tools I need to do everything I need to do for Orbit Fab. And
which is amazing.
Which is,
when you
yeah,
think
which
about
like in undergrad, that was definitely not a thing. We were doing PTC Creo in Dropbox, which is a disaster. Yeah, so that's definitely a change, but I think that's actually one place where the students are all going to be prepared for this when they graduate. One of our more senior engineers who joined us recently was commenting about this, where we had to do some deliverable for write an abstract for a conference or something. And like 3 days beforehand, there was basically nothing in there. And then we said, okay, this 3 hours, we're going to write this. And everyone was in the document at the same time, writing different sections at the same time, which for me, that's how we wrote papers at Stanford. That's how you write assignments now as a student. You just hop in a Google Doc and you say, part out sections and work on it. And that I think feels natural to a lot of people who are in school now or recently graduating from school. And that I think was a pleasant surprise for our more senior engineer, who was like, this is not how we used to do things 10 years ago. This isn't like, we couldn't do things this way 10 years ago. So I think generally I get the feeling that people are leaning more into cloud, and I think students now are already well prepared for working in a cloud collaborative environment.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we think about Onshape in this case in particular, we've seen huge adoption rates in the K-12 space over the last couple of years, definitely, and certainly in the university space. And so there's sort of this wave of students coming that are going to be, that wave's going to hit the workforce and industry pretty soon here, if it hasn't started to hit already. One of the questions that you and I talked about, Arul, in preparation for today, was how can a new employee who's been using Onshape and been, is very cloud comfortable and focused and everything, how can they talk to their employer who hasn't been using Onshape or who isn't familiar with it, how can they kind of have that conversation? And I know a lot of this comes out of your own individual experience and having a similar conversation, but can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. Yeah, there's actually sort of two aspects to that question. Also, I've heard from students saying like, how do I talk in an interview about, let's say this company uses SolidWorks, but I've only been using Onshape. How do I talk about that? And for that sort of interview phase, just everyone uses parametric CAD now, right? It's all solid modeling. There's not really a fundamental difference in how SolidWorks works or Creo or PTC or NX or any of these. And just showing the ability to do design work in a parametric CAD package is good enough. Unless you're going for an internship where they're like, we're going to throw you immediately into this other package. What really matters is that you know how to model, not that you know the specific software. In terms of convincing people to use Onshape, because not having the cloud is really annoying once you've gotten used to it. At least I'm sure Mark and Sylvia can talk to this more as well, but I think are going to be sort of hybrid moving forward indefinitely. I don't like cases where we're from are back down, and so we're back in the office, but we're not going to be 100% in the office and tied to a workstation probably ever again. And so that flexibility that Onshape and the cloud gives you for that sort of thing is currently not matched by any other package, at least not without paying, 5 or 6 times as much.
Thanks, Arul. Sylvia.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that I love the cloud also. I mean, when I was at the university, I remember that we couldn't use just any software because our computers had to be like high-end computers, not every, basic computer, because then you will have like the blue screen error. And yeah. I had a very old computer, so I had to always be asking somebody else for, oh, can you please lend me your computer, so I need to do this homework or something like that. It was very annoying, and it was always failing. Or of course, I don't know if you guys had the click to terminate error. When you've been working for so many hours and then everything was lost. I always remember that, and I love that we don't have that issue with Onshape. I think that's very accessible also for every student with a very basic computer. And I think, like Arul said, every software is very similar. It's like the basics. It's the same for everyone. So I mean, every software. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
So Sylvia, I know your experience interviewing for your current position was a little bit unique, or we've talked about it a little bit. Can you kind of share that with the group here today, and then maybe give some advice to the students and young professionals in our audience based on your experience?
Yes, of course. So before this job, I was in another company, and because of the pandemic, I lost my job. There I was a designer level 1. So when I saw this job opportunity, it was level 2. And I said, oh, it's very high level. I think I don't have the experience or, the knowledge to apply for that job opening. So I remember thinking about applying for a week or 2. And I said, I'm going to apply anyway, because at least I will have like the opportunity to be part of an interview or something like that. So I applied. And I actually did pretty well. I prepared myself for, I think, 1 whole week. I studied everything that I could think of, because I was like an overthinker. I was, oh, what if they ask me about the density of this material? And what if they ask me about, I don't know, costs and similar, I don't know, any kind of question. So I was studying everything that I could. And actually in the interview, I don't know if some of them are in here hearing this conference, but my interview was 2-hour long technical interview with 4 expertise of my company. And I remember I was so nervous, but since I had studied so much, I was feeling also a little bit confident, and I did really good. I think that if you think that you don't know about a topic, go ahead and study about it. Just don't go, I don't know it, because then you will close yourself an opportunity there. If you know you have an improvement area, go and work on that area. I think that don't ever stay on your comfort zone, go a little bit more higher than that. And, yeah, and don't close yourself the opportunity of a job interview of another position just because you think you won't be able to make it. Always prepare, study, and go for it.
Great, thanks. I know we're getting close to Q&A time. I do have just a couple questions before we shift gears into that. Of course, the first part of the title of this session is preparing your portfolio. And so I would love to talk, have each of you share a little bit about your thoughts on, one, is a portfolio necessary? What should candidates be thinking about including in their portfolio? And I think, from a skills assessment as well as actual assets, if you could talk a little bit about the importance of a portfolio and what types of things they should focus on for their portfolios as they're preparing to interview and explore different jobs. And Arul, I'll have you start.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm interviewing for mechanical or mechanical-ish adjacent roles at Orbit Fab. And for those, we really like to see a portfolio because it's hard to get just from a resume, like what is the thing you actually built? We really want to see people who have gotten their hands dirty and actually built something. Not necessarily physical. For software positions, we want to see someone who built some cool piece of software. And everything you guys are building is going to be pretty complicated. And the best way to convey that is a bunch of pictures. And websites are a really good way to do a portfolio, right? Getting your own domain name and putting up a website with, Squarespace or Weebly or any of these build your website tools is not that expensive. And you can, once you get a job, you can delete it if you want, and it costs you like a total of $20. And that way you can have videos, you can have pictures, you can include code for things you worked on, you can include CAD files, you can link to your Onshape documents. It just gives whoever you're interviewing with a much more cohesive picture of what it is you did. So yeah, we definitely like seeing portfolios.
Great. Mark, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll second everything Arul said. And in addition, the portfolio is great, pictures and videos of your past projects. And one thing I tell people is you can bring a tablet to the interview, so you can have those pictures and videos up there, right there, and you can show the interviewer, this is it. You can flip through them in real time. This is that project. It was difficult and it was hard because of these reasons, and you can see that in these pictures, and this is all the cool stuff that was done related to it. And then to second what Sylvia was talking to, as far as skills for an interview, definitely prep the skills that you think that company is looking for. So research the company, figure out what their focuses are, if it is more of an aerodynamics aspect or structural analysis or any of the different sub-disciplines, and do research on that and study up on it.
Thanks,
Actually,
Mark.
just to jump back in, one thing I forgot to mention is be clear about what you did. I've noticed a lot of recent graduates tend to use what I call the academic we. So oh yeah, we did this and we did that. And yes, that is a style used in academic writing, but that is not a useful style when you're interviewing. We really want to know what part of this project did you work on? What are you responsible for? And we all know that engineering is done in teams. So it's not like we don't know you worked in a team, but be clear about what you did and own it.
Yeah, excellent point. Sylvia.
So far for this position is the only one that's asked me before for my portfolio. And actually, since Onshape was brand new for me, they requested me to create some models, some drawings, and just play with Onshape just to see what I could create in that and explain in the interview. So I remember playing with Onshape. I created even a spinner and I made it rotate. I created some drawings and some different kinds of components. So I think that it's a good tip. For example, if you are going to apply for a position at Garrett, let's say, if you create a component that is kind of similar to what Garrett does, I think that will make, how do you say, I can remember the word in English, sorry.
A clearer connection or
Yes, exactly. It would impress them. So yeah, try to play with the Onshape components and create components, I mean.
All right. Thank you. All great words of advice. Before we jump into the Q&A round, final question, kind of lightning round. If you could go back and give your student self one piece of advice for succeeding in their career or in, entering the workforce, what would it be? And I'll start with you, Sylvia.
All right. For myself, since I wanted to apply for a design position, I would say to myself, get some GD&T training as soon as possible, because that's a very tough subject. And it's very important to know it. And I remember having some issues at the beginning, but I think every company has their trainings and they get you prepared for it. But if I could have done that sooner, that would actually be great.
Great. Thanks, Sylvia. Arul.
Yeah. This is an interesting question because most of the things I would give myself advice about are things I did, because that's why I'm giving advice about them. I think overall,
Top piece.
yeah, overall, I would actually say don't stress about it as much as I did. Like, things will either work or they won't. You'll eventually end up somewhere that you're doing work that you like and that you're happy doing. And there might be some bumps along the way and there might not be some bumps along the way, but stressing about it ahead of time doesn't help anything.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I wish I took more software and statistics classes in school. It's amazing, even as a mechanical engineer, having a good background in software can automate your life and your job a little bit, and it can really make things easier. And no matter what area of engineering you're in, you're probably going to work with data. There's a lot of data in the world today, and knowing how to understand and interpret that properly is where stats come in. And I think historically, engineers don't have enough of a stats background.
Interesting. All very different points. Appreciate your insight and perspective. All right, Bridget, are there any questions for the group that have come in?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been great, everybody. And thank you to those of you that have been entering questions. There's been a lot that have come in. So I'll do my best to sort through these and those that have come in. So to start us off, this question, I think relevant for any of you to answer. What advice do you have for someone entering the workforce as a professional for the very first time?
One thing one of my former bosses said to me was, be a sponge. So absorb as much information as you can from all the people around you. You're going to be thrown in a new environment with lots of people experienced in that, and just try to absorb as much as you can, ask a lot of questions and learn.
Yeah, the corollary to that is assume you don't know anything. Sort of, there's like, as you're getting close to graduating, there's definitely a tendency to be like, oh yeah, I know more than everyone that I talk to on a regular basis every day. And that is no longer true, and just own that and be like, when you don't know something, ask people questions, admit that you don't know things. If people ask you questions, admit that you don't know the answer, and then go find out.
Excellent.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I remember one time a manager told me that they would prefer to hire somebody willing to learn than somebody that already knows everything but doesn't want to share, the knowledge. So, like Arul and Mark said, be open to learn and keep learning, keep improving yourself, and you will mostly have it.
Yeah. And I can certainly attest that that applies whether you're looking for an engineering position or any other positions, being willing to learn and assume you don't know everything. Great. Bridget, other questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Okay, so this one here, it goes back to the portfolios that you were speaking about. So how should prospective applicants or contractors showcase their portfolio for work that is IP sensitive or Itar controlled? So if a lot of their work has been, with previous employers and whatnot, what type of recommendations do you have for them?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this can be a tough subject for people. Try to draw as much information that's already publicly available. So sometimes I will just go do web searches to find pictures or information about it, because if I can find it on the web, then I know it's already in the public domain and I'm not going to worry about violating any NDA or anything. And then it's also okay to say during the interview, hey, this is proprietary or under an NDA and I can't go into any details. And the interviewer should be perfectly okay with that.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Other questions?
Yeah, we've definitely interviewed candidates who are in that situation. And like Mark said, talk about it as much as you can. And when you get to that boundary of this is the point at which I have to stop talking about it, people will understand. If you say, I'm working on this missile system and I did the guidance, and then I can't tell you anything more, that makes sense. In terms of your portfolio, if you have personal projects, feel free to fill it out with those. Anything that shows sort of relevant skills, even if it's not in a professional context, is still, I think, good to have in there.
Thanks. Bridget?
Yeah, that's great. So I know we're getting close to time here, so this will be lightning round on this question. So what are your thoughts on continuing professional development and skill development once you're in the role? If you're, whether it be an entry level or you've been in your role for a few years, how do you feel about that? And is there anything in particular that you've done?
Super important. In fact, right now on my team, we're organizing a GD&T class for the whole group, something we do periodically.
Maybe Sylvia can join because that was her.
Yeah, we're actually also organizing a GD&T class. So clearly there's a common theme here.
Yeah, exactly. And Garrett organizes GD&T trainings also every couple of times a year. Well, more than a year, but it's very, very important. I wanted to say that last year when I lost my job, I remember being sad, but I said, well, I can take advantage of this time and prepare myself for something bigger in the future. So I took 2 classes. I started learning another language and just keeping my mind, busy and keep learning and improving myself. It's never enough. I think you never know enough.
Yeah, there's always more to learn.
Yes.
Certainly. I think that's a great point to end on. I know we're just about at time, but want to thank and acknowledge Mark, Arul, Sylvia. Thank you so much for your time today and your thoughts and guidance here. And thank you for everyone in our audience for joining and for your participation and questions. I apologize that we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but appreciate you being here and joining us for Onshape Live. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.